I wanted to go ahead and make a video about this because I know I'm going to be asked about it. So I'm just going to cut straight to the chase here, guys. I just saw JDF's response video to CM Punk's C2E2 video. And this is something I see on a daily basis, several times a day. The whole JDF versus CM Punk, make it happen, you know, it's not going to happen, guys. Alright? And here's why. They can continue to make videos back and forth, saying whatever they want to each other till they're blue in the face. Now, CM Punk hasn't been the one calling JDF out. It's JDF's been the one that's been doing most of the calling out. However which way you want to interpret the scenario, it's irrelevant. The bottom line is, this fight's not going to happen in the UFC. It's not to say the fight will never happen. It's not going to happen in the UFC. Now, let me break something down for those of you that don't know. Alright, I know there's a lot of you probably watching this right now and saying, well, why can't it happen? You know, Jason David Frank is a UFC fighter. No, he's not. Number one, UFC is not a sport. MMA is a sport. UFC is a promotion. It is a promotion that facilitates the sport of mixed martial arts. JDF is an MMA fighter. That is true. He's not a UFC fighter because he is not under contract with the UFC. CM Punk is under contract with the UFC. In order for this fight to happen, Dana White and the UFC would have to sign Jason David Frank to a contract. Now, whether it be a one-bout agreement or a multi-fight deal, that's what would have to happen in order for this fight to happen. Why will that not happen? Because Dana White and the UFC already received heavy criticism for signing CM Punk, a guy who has pretty much no credentials to even be setting foot in the octagon. Okay? Now, this is not an attack on CM Punk. This is just the truth. Alright? He does not have the credentials to step inside the cage. Why was he signed to the UFC then? A lot of you are thinking. His name value. He's a pay-per-view draw. You're in for a very rude awakening if you think that he was signed for any other reason outside of his name value. Now look, that's not to say that CM Punk, if he practices hard enough and he actually becomes a student of the game, that he can't be successful. Maybe he can. Maybe he can. Maybe he'll prove me wrong. I know a lot of you are probably thinking, well, Brock Lesnar did it. Guys, the circumstances for Brock Lesnar were different. You see, Brock Lesnar was a lifelong athlete. This is a guy that was an amateur wrestler, a collegiate wrestler, an NCAA Division I champion. That is a fantastic base to transition over into MMA, because this guy had been a lifelong competitor. Okay? Just being a pro wrestler does not qualify you to fight in the UFC. Now, that being said, and moving on, why won't they sign Jason David Frank? It's pretty simple, guys. The UFC is not Pride Fighting Championships. And if you don't know what a Pride Fighting Championship is, Pride Fighting Championship was a Japanese mixed martial art promotion that was bought out by the UFC in, I think, 2006 or 2007. Now, Pride Fighting Championship, as opposed to the UFC, they actually did their mixed martial arts bouts in a ring. And they are responsible for some of the bigger names that you see today in the UFC. Well, I should say a lot of guys built their careers in Pride Fighting Championships. Guys like Mirko Cro Cop, guys like Josh Barnett, guys like Minotauro Nogueira, Shogun Rua, Vanderlei Silva, who is no longer in the UFC, but he built his career up in Pride. Quentin Rampage Jackson. These are all guys that really built their careers in Pride Fighting Championships. Okay? Now, the thing about Pride Fighting Championship is that, unfortunately, they were also financially backed by the Yakuza. So there was a lot of fights that were fixed in Pride Fighting Championships. The other thing about Pride Fighting Championship is they put on a lot of novelty fights. They put on fights between, it was pretty common to see them put on fights between a pro wrestler, a Japanese pro wrestler, and an actual fighter. Things like this actually did happen. Alright, and for that, they weren't always taken as seriously. And the fact that they fixed fights, and when word of that surfaced, they were taken even less seriously. Now, I'm not one to believe that all their fights were fixed, but who knows at this point? It's possible. Once that news came out that was going on, who knows? Maybe a lot of these other fights were fixed as well. But the bottom line is, and the point I'm getting at here is that the UFC already has received heavy criticism for signing CM Punk. Okay, because it was a completely different situation from the Brock Lesnar situation. It is highly unlikely that they would then go ahead and sign Jason David Frank. Even if Jason David Frank wants to do it for $1, even if he wants to do it for free, they're not going to do it, because it would be way too much bad press for them. It would be way too much bad publicity for them to go through that kind of situation. They would be the laughingstock of the MMA world if they did that. And it would be hard to take them seriously after trying to put something together like that. They are not WWE, guys. I know a lot of people try to equate UFC to WWE. It's not WWE, guys. And it's very unlikely that something like that would happen. The UFC would have to be really, really desperate. They'd have to be completely tapped out of ideas to make a fight like that happen. Again, as I stated before, it's not to say that the fight will never happen, because it could. An MMA bout between CM Punk and JDF is totally possible. It's just not possible in the UFC. Maybe in another promotion, but not in the UFC. That's all I have to say about this, guys. I know there's going to be a lot of people that are going to talk and continue to comment about this dream matchup, but that's probably all it'll ever be, a dream. And for those of you that don't know a lot about mixed martial arts, I would say strongly educate yourself and learn about the sport, and you'll see why that this fight is probably never going to happen. I mean, in the UFC. But anyways, that is all, and that is all I'm going to say about this. I'm done with this subject. You guys have a great day, and as always, the hunt continues.